The South African Apartheid Journey. Apartheid, an Afrikaans word meaning apartness, was a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination in South Africa that lasted from 1948 to 1994. It was designed to maintain white supremacy and control over the country's political, social, and economic systems. The apartheid regime had profound and lasting effects on South African society and its people. Racial segregation in South Africa began long before the official apartheid era. The arrival of Dutch settlers in the 17th century marked the beginning of racial discrimination against the indigenous African population. The British colonial period further entrenched these practices with laws that restricted land ownership and movement for Black South Africans. The early 20th century saw the rise of Afrikaner nationalism, driven by a desire to preserve Afrikaner culture and identity. The National Party, NP, founded in 1914, became the political vehicle for these aspirations. The NP's victory in the 1948 general election marked the beginning of formal apartheid. The party's platform was built on the promise of implementing a comprehensive system of racial segregation. The apartheid regime was characterized by a series of laws that institutionalized racial discrimination. Key pieces of legislation included Population Registration Act 1950. This law required all South Africans to be classified by race: white, black, Bantu, colored, mixed race, or Indian. Group Areas Act 1950. This act segregated residential areas by race, forcibly removing non-whites from areas designated for whites. Bantu Education Act 1953. This law established a separate and inferior education system for Black South Africans. Pass laws. These laws required Black South Africans to carry passbooks, dompas, to enter white areas, severely restricting their freedom of movement. Apartheid policies extended to all aspects of life, including education, healthcare, employment, and public amenities. Black South Africans were denied access to quality education and healthcare, and were often relegated to low-paying, menial jobs. Public facilities, such as beaches, parks, and transportation, were segregated, with those designated for whites being far superior. Resistance to apartheid began almost immediately. The African National Congress, ANC, founded in 1912, became the leading organization in the fight against apartheid. The ANC, along with other groups like the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, and the South African Communist Party, SACP, organized protests, strikes, and boycotts. One of the most significant events in the early resistance movement was the Sharpeville Massacre in 1960. Police opened fire on a peaceful protest against passing laws, killing 69 people and wounding many others. The massacre drew international condemnation and marked a turning point in the struggle against apartheid. Following the Sharpeville Massacre, the ANC and other resistance groups adopted a more militant approach. The ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, was formed in 1961, with Nelson Mandela as one of its leaders. The group carried out acts of sabotage against government installations and infrastructure. The apartheid regime faced increasing international pressure throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Many countries imposed economic sanctions and trade embargoes on South Africa. These measures, combined with internal resistance, began to weaken the apartheid system. South Africa was also isolated culturally and in sports. The country was banned from participating in international sporting events, including the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup. Cultural boycotts saw artists and performers refusing to visit or perform in South Africa. By the late 1980s, the apartheid regime was under immense pressure, both domestically and internationally. President P.W. Botha initiated some reforms, such as repealing past laws and legalizing interracial marriages. But these measures were seen as too little, too late. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk became president and recognized the need for more substantial changes. In 1990, he announced the unbanning of the ANC and other political organizations and the release of Nelson Mandela after 27 years in prison. These actions set the stage for negotiations to end apartheid. Negotiations between the apartheid government and anti-apartheid groups began in earnest in the early 1990s. These talks, known as the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, CODESA, aimed to create a new, inclusive political system. Despite setbacks and violence, the negotiations ultimately succeeded. The first multiracial elections were held in April 1994. Nelson Mandela, representing the ANC, won a landslide victory and became South Africa's first black president. The elections marked the official end of apartheid and the beginning of a new era of democracy and reconciliation. To address the atrocities committed during the apartheid era, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, was established in 1995. Chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the TRC aimed to uncover the truth about human rights violations and promote healing and forgiveness. Despite the end of apartheid, South Africa continues to grapple with the legacy of racial segregation and inequality. Economic disparities remain stark, with many black South Africans still living in poverty and facing limited opportunities. The post-apartheid government has made efforts to promote reconciliation and nation-building. Policies such as Black Economic Empowerment, BEE, and land reform aim to address historical injustices and create a more equitable society. The apartheid regime in South Africa was a dark chapter in the country's history, characterized by systemic racial discrimination and oppression. The struggle against apartheid was long and arduous, involving immense sacrifices and resilience from those who fought for freedom and equality. The end of apartheid and the transition to democracy marked a significant victory for human rights and justice. However, the legacy of apartheid continues to shape South African society, and the journey towards true equality and reconciliation remains ongoing. If you want us to share more historical and educative stories like this, please share, like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.